The morning sun beat down on Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, as a dusty rental car pulled into the visitor parking lot. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell stepped out, her civilian clothes deliberately chosen to blend in. At 42 years old, she carried herself with quiet confidence, though today she kept that presence carefully contained. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a plain black t-shirt. No one would guess she was one of the most decorated Marine officers in recent history. Sarah had come to Camp Lejeune on a special assignment. General Thompson had asked her to conduct an unofficial assessment of the base's readiness and morale. The best way to do that, they'd agreed, was to arrive unannounced and observe without the fanfare that usually accompanied a visit from brass. As she walked toward the main administrative building, Sarah passed groups of young Marines in their combat utilities. Some glanced at her with mild curiosity, but most paid her no attention. She was just another civilian on base, probably someone's wife or mother visiting. At the security checkpoint, Lance Corporal Davies checked her special visitor pass. The young Marine, barely 20 years old, looked at the pass, then at her, then back at the pass with confusion. "Ma'am, this says you have full base access," he said slowly. "That's unusual for a civilian visitor." Sarah kept her expression neutral. "I'm here for a meeting with Colonel Richards. The access was pre-approved." Davies shrugged and handed back her credentials. "Building's that way, ma'am. Have a good day." As Sarah walked through the base, memories flooded back. She'd been stationed here 15 years ago as a young captain. Back then, she'd faced the same dismissive looks, the same assumptions. Female Marines were common enough now, but women in combat leadership roles still raised eyebrows. She entered the administrative building and found her way to Conference Room C, where Colonel Richards was supposed to be conducting a leadership briefing. Sarah slipped in quietly through the back door. The room was packed with about 30 Marines, mostly officers ranging from lieutenants to majors. Colonel Richards stood at the front, his booming voice filling the space. "Leadership isn't about being liked," Richards was saying. "It's about making the hard choices. It's about being willing to put yourself in harm's way for your Marines." Sarah found an empty chair in the back corner and sat down. A few officers turned to look at her, clearly wondering what a civilian was doing in their briefing. Major Kurt Brennan, sitting 2 seats away, leaned over with a smirk. "You lost, lady. This is a military briefing, not a family readiness meeting." Sarah met his eyes calmly. "I'm where I'm supposed to be, Major." Brennan's smirk widened. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of aggressive confidence that often masked insecurity. "Really? You know anything about military leadership, about combat?" "A little," Sarah replied quietly. Captain Jessica Torres, sitting in front of them, turned around. She was one of only 3 female officers in the room. "Don't mind Brennan, ma'am. He thinks women should stick to support roles." Brennan's face reddened. "I never said that, Torres. I just believe in maintaining standards. Combat leadership requires certain qualities." "Like what?" Torres challenged. "Like experience under fire," Brennan shot back. "Like the ability to carry a wounded Marine to safety, like earning respect through actions, not quotas." Sarah listened to the exchange without comment, though her jaw tightened slightly. She'd heard these arguments countless times throughout her career. Colonel Richards noticed the disturbance and paused his briefing. "Is there a problem back there?" Brennan stood up. "Sir, we have a civilian visitor. Not sure she should be in a classified leadership briefing." Richards squinted toward the back of the room, trying to see past the glare from the windows. "Ma'am, can you identify yourself?" Sarah stood slowly. "I'm here with General Thompson's authorization, Colonel. Please continue your briefing." Richards looked confused but nodded. "Very well. As I was saying, true leadership is tested in crisis. Let me tell you about an operation in Afghanistan back in 2010. Operation Phantom Hawk." Sarah's stomach tightened. She kept her face carefully neutral as Richards continued. "Phantom Hawk was a disaster that became a legend," Richards said. "A Marine unit was ambushed in the Korangal Valley, outnumbered 5-1. Their commanding officer was killed in the first minutes. A young captain took command, held the position for 14 hours under continuous fire, saved 23 Marines." Brennan spoke up. "I heard about that operation, sir. The captain called in danger-close air support on their own position. Absolute warrior." "Indeed," Richards agreed. That captain was awarded the Navy Cross, youngest Marine to receive it in a decade. They called him the Ghost of Korengel. Sarah noticed Tors trying not to roll her eyes. The junior captain clearly knew something the others didn't. Him, sir? Tors asked carefully. Richards paused. What do you mean, Captain? Nothing, sir. Please continue. But Brennan had caught Tors' tone. What are you implying, Tors? You think a woman could have pulled off Phantom Hawk? He laughed harshly. That's rich. No offense to female Marines, but that operation required extraordinary physical and mental toughness. No offense, Tors repeated. You just said women aren't capable of extraordinary toughness. The room grew tense. Other officers were now paying attention to the argument. Richards raised a hand. That's enough. We're here to discuss leadership principles, not debate gender politics. Sarah stood up. Actually, Colonel, I think this is exactly the discussion we should be having. Every head in the room turned to her. Brennan looked incredulous. Excuse me, Richards said. Ma'am, you're a guest here. I am, Sarah agreed. But I'm also someone who spent 20 years earning the right to speak about leadership under fire. Brennan laughed. 20 years doing what? Married to a Marine? That doesn't make you an expert, lady. Sarah walked to the front of the room, her movements deliberate and controlled. Major Brennan, you mentioned that combat leadership requires certain qualities. Would you mind listing them again? Brennan stood up, towering over her. Sure, physical strength, mental toughness, the ability to make split-second decisions, combat experience, the respect of your troops. Interesting list, Sarah said. Tell me, Major, how many combat deployments do you have? Brennan's chest puffed out. 3, Iraq twice, Afghanistan once. Any medals for valor? Bronze Star, he said proudly. Sarah nodded. Impressive. Colonel Richards, you were telling the story of Phantom Hawk, but you got one detail wrong. Richards frowned. I've studied that operation extensively. I'm sure you have, Sarah said, but the commanding officer who was killed in the first minutes. He wasn't the only senior officer present. There were 2 captains in that unit. When Major Harrison was killed, Captain Johnson was severely wounded. The junior captain, the one who took command, was 27 years old, first combat deployment. Brennan scoffed, and you know this how? Sarah ignored him and continued. That captain held a defensive position on a ridge for 14 hours. When 3 Marines were wounded and trapped in an exposed position, that captain personally led the rescue, carrying one of them 200 yards under fire. When ammunition ran low, that captain coordinated with Afghan allies to share supplies, using broken Pashto learned from a phrase book. The room had gone very quiet. Tors was watching Sarah with growing recognition. The Danger Close air support, Sarah continued, was called in when enemy forces breached the perimeter. The captain stayed exposed on the ridge to direct the strikes, taking shrapnel from the bombs. Refused medical evacuation until every wounded Marine was aboard the helicopters. Richard stepped forward. Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but classified operational details. The captain spent 6 weeks in recovery, Sarah interrupted. Shrapnel had damaged the left shoulder, making it difficult to raise that arm above 90 degrees even today. The Navy Cross ceremony was delayed 3 months because of the recovery time. She turned to face Brennan directly. You asked about my qualifications to speak on leadership, Major. You mentioned physical strength. I deadlifted 300 pounds last week. Not bad for someone my age and size. Mental toughness. I've made decisions that sent Marines to their deaths, and I live with those choices every day. Combat experience, 4 deployments, 63 combat missions. Brennan's smirk was fatting. Who are you? Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out her military ID, handing it to Richards. The colonel's face went white as he read it. As for the respect of my troops, Sarah continued, I can't speak to that. You'd have to ask the Marines who served under me. The ones who are still alive because of decisions I made. Or maybe the families of the ones who didn't come home who still send me letters every Christmas. Tors stood up suddenly, her face showing a mix of awe and vindication. You're Phantom Hawk. You're Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell. The name rippled through the room like an electric shock. Every Marine there knew that name, though most had never connected it to the Phantom Hawk story. The conference room fell into stunned silence. Colonel Richards stared at the military ID in his hand, then looked up at Sarah, then back at the ID. His face had gone from white to red, processing the magnitude of his mistake. "Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell," he said formally, his voice cracking slightly. We weren't expecting you." Sarah took her ID back calmly. "That was the point, Colonel. General Thompson wanted an honest assessment of leadership culture at this base. I'd say I'm getting one." Major Brennan remained standing, his face cycling through emotions, disbelief, embarrassment, anger, and something else. His jaw worked as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find words. "Sit down, Major," Sarah said quietly. It wasn't a suggestion. Brennan sat. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor was loud in the silent room. Sarah walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room and picked up a marker. "Colonel Richards, may I continue with your briefing? I think we have an important teaching moment here." Richards nodded mutely and took a seat in the front row. Sarah wrote 3 words on the board: "Assumptions kill leaders." "Every person in this room made an assumption about me when I walked in," she began. "Civilian, non-threat, probably someone's dependent. Major Brennan assumed I couldn't understand military leadership. Colonel Richards assumed the hero of Phantom Hawk was male. These assumptions aren't just wrong, in combat they're lethal." She turned to face the room. "Let me tell you what really happened during Phantom Hawk, not the sanitized version in the after-action reports." Captain Torres pulled out a notebook, her pen poised. Other officers leaned forward. "May 15th, 2010, Sarah began. Coringal Valley, we were escorting a supply convoy to forward operating base Restrepo. Intelligence said the route was clear. Intelligence was wrong." She drew a rough map on the whiteboard. "The ambush hit us here at a choke point between 2 ridges. RPGs took out our lead and rear vehicles in the first 30 seconds. We were trapped." Her voice remained steady, but her left hand unconsciously moved to her shoulder. "Major Harrison ordered us to take defensive positions on the eastern ridge. Good tactical decision, except the enemy had already positioned fighters there. Harrison was hit by sniper fire while directing the movement. Direct shot to the head. He was dead before he hit the ground." Several Marines shifted uncomfortably. Death was part of their profession, but hearing it described so clinically was still unsettling. "Captain Johnson was senior to me by 3 months," Sarah continued. "He took command for about 45 seconds before an RPG exploded 10 feet from his position. Shrapnel tore through his right leg and abdomen. He was conscious but couldn't stand, couldn't move." She drew X's on the board, marking positions. "I had 28 Marines, 5 of them already wounded. The enemy had approximately 150 fighters in prepared positions. Every textbook would tell you to break contact, retreat, save who you could." "But you didn't," Torres said softly. Sarah shook her head. "I couldn't, our wounded couldn't move fast enough. If we retreated, we'd leave them behind, so we dug in." She marked defensive positions on her crude map. "I split our force into 3 fire teams, put our best marksman, Corporal Chen, on overwatch. He had 60 rounds, told him to make each one count. He did. 29 confirmed kills before a mortar round took his position." The casual mention of the corporal's death sent another ripple through the room. "Here's what they don't put in the official reports," Sarah said. 3 hours into the fight, we were almost out of ammunition. I had to make a choice. Call for emergency resupply, which would put helicopters at risk, or try something else. "The Afghan allies," Captain Torres said. "You mentioned them earlier." Sarah nodded. "There was an Afghan National Army unit operating 5 kilometers north. They weren't supposed to be in our area, and we had no official communication protocol with them. But I remembered something. Their commander, Captain Ahmadi, had a brother who was killed by the Taliban 2 years earlier, same group that was attacking us." She set down the marker. "I used our interpreter's satellite phone to call Ahmadi directly. My Pashto was terrible, but I managed to communicate our position and situation. Told him we had wounded. Mentioned that we were fighting the group that killed his brother." "That's highly irregular," Colonel Richards said carefully. "It was completely against protocol," Sarah agreed. "If it hadn't worked, I'd have been court-martialed. But 40 minutes later, Ahmadi's unit hit the enemy's northern flank. Gave us enough breathing room to consolidate our position and share their ammunition." Major Brennan finally found his voice. "The official report doesn't mention Afghan involvement until hour 6. "Because I didn't report it until after the fact," Sarah said. "I took responsibility for the protocol violation. General Thompson gave me a private reprimand after awarding me the Navy Cross. said it was the stupidest and bravest thing he'd seen in 30 years of service. A young lieutenant raised his hand. "Ma'am, the danger close air support, how close was it really?" Sarah's expression darkened. 50 meters. The minimum safe distance is 600 meters, but the enemy had breached our perimeter. We were in hand-to-hand combat. I had to make a choice, risk killing my own Marines with our bombs, or definitely lose them to enemy fighters. She walked to the window and looked out at the base. "I marked our position with smoke and told the pilots to drop ordnance danger close. The first bomb landed 40 meters from my position. The concussion knocked me 15 feet down the ridge. Shrapnel went through my shoulder, my ribs, my left leg, but it worked. The enemy attack broke." She turned back to the room. "I don't tell you this to impress you. I tell you because every officer in this room will face impossible decisions. You'll have seconds to choose between bad options. Your assumptions about who can lead, who can fight, who can make those decisions, those assumptions will get people killed." Captain Torres spoke up. "Ma'am, after you were wounded, you still refused evacuation." "Would you leave your Marines, Captain?" Sarah asked. Torres shook her head immediately. "No, ma'am." "Neither could I. We still had 6 hours before the quick reaction force could reach us. 6 more hours of sporadic attacks. I commanded from a stretcher, using our radio operator, Lance Corporal Williams, as my eyes and ears. Williams is a general now, by the way. Says I taught him more about leadership in those 14 hours than 4 years at the academy." Colonel Richards cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Colonel, I owe you an apology. When I told the story, I assumed." "You assumed what everyone assumes," Sarah interrupted. "That's why I'm here, Colonel, not for apologies, but to change the culture that creates these assumptions." She looked directly at Brennan. "Major, you have 3 Bronze Stars. You've served honorably. But your attitude toward female Marines doesn't just insult them, it weakens our entire force. We can't afford to waste half our talent pool because of outdated prejudices." Brennan's face was red, but he nodded stiffly. Sarah continued, "Every Marine in this room has potential. Some of you will be tested in combat. Some will serve entire careers without firing a shot in anger. Both paths require courage. Both deserve respect." A senior captain raised his hand. "Ma'am, after Phantom Hawk, you could have had any assignment. Why did you stay in combat roles?" Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the room. "Because that's where I was needed. I did 2 more deployments to Afghanistan, 1 to Syria. Each time I dealt with officers who thought like Major Brennan at first. By the end of each deployment, those same officers would trust me with their lives." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But here's what really matters. In my last deployment, I commanded a mixed unit, 40% female Marines in combat roles. They performed identically to their male counterparts in every metric that mattered. Marksmanship, physical endurance, decision-making under pressure, courage under fire. But the physical standards," Brennan began, "are the same for everyone in my unit," Sarah finished. "If you can't carry your gear and a wounded comrade, you don't belong in combat, man or woman. But if you can meet those standards, I don't care what chromosomes you have." She looked around the room. "I've seen male Marines who couldn't hack it in combat. I've seen female Marines who were absolute warriors. The only thing that matters is capability and character." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Captain Torres began to clap. Slowly, others joined in until the entire room was applauding. Even Brennan reluctantly brought his hands together. Sarah raised a hand for silence. "Save your applause. We have work to do. Colonel Richards, I'd like to continue observing your leadership program. General Thompson wants a full report on base readiness and culture. What I've seen so far is mixed." Richards stood. "Of course, Colonel Mitchell, anything you need." "What I need," Sarah said, "is honesty. I've been here for exactly 2 hours and I've already identified several issues. Brennan's attitude isn't unique, it's symptomatic of a larger problem. Captain Torres is one of 3 female officers in this room of 30. That's 10%. The Marine Corps is 18% female. Where are they?" No one answered. "I'll tell you where they are," Sarah continued. "They're in support roles, administrative positions, logistics, not because they can't handle combat leadership, but because they're never given the chance. Because too many officers like Major Brennan make assumptions about their capabilities." The briefing room remained tense as Sarah's words hung in the air. She could see the discomfort on several faces, not just from those who disagreed with her, but from those who recognized their own complicity in the system she was describing. "Colonel Mitchell," a young lieutenant named Patterson spoke up. "With respect, ma'am, some of us have tried to advocate for more inclusive practices, but we're told it's not a priority, that we're being too politically correct." Sarah turned to him. "And who tells you that, Lieutenant?" Patterson glanced nervously at Colonel Richards. "Various senior officers, ma'am. The message is usually that we should focus on readiness, not social experiments." "Social experiments?" Sarah repeated. "That's what they called racial integration in 1948. That's what they called allowing women in the military in 1948. Every expansion of our force has been called a social experiment by those who feared change." She walked back to the whiteboard and erased her previous notes. "Let me ask you all something. How many of you know about the Battle of Ramadi in 2006? Most hands went up. Good. Now, how many of you know that one of the most effective squad leaders during that battle was Sergeant Maria Rodriguez? Only 3 hands remained raised, including Captain Torres. "Exactly," Sarah said. "Rodriguez led 17 combat patrols, eliminated 32 enemy combatants, and saved 9 Marines during a complex ambush. But her story isn't told. Her achievements aren't celebrated. Why?" Major Brennan shifted in his seat. "Ma'am, perhaps it's because individual stories get lost in larger operations." "No, Major," Sarah cut him off. "It's because we choose which stories to tell. We choose which heroes to celebrate. And for too long, we've chosen to ignore half our heroes because they don't fit the traditional image." She pulled out her phone and showed a photograph on the screen at the front of the room. It showed a younger version of herself in full combat gear, standing with a squad of Marines in Afghanistan. "This was taken 3 days before Phantom Hawk," she said. "Look at the Marines in this photo. Half of them didn't come home. Private First Class Jackson, 19 years old, from Detroit. Loved basketball, wanted to be a coach after his service. Sergeant Chen, the marksman I mentioned earlier, had a 2-year-old daughter he never got to see grow up." Her voice remained steady, but the emotion was evident. "Lance Corporal Maria Santos, 21 years old, wanted to be a Marine since she was 12. Some officers tried to steer her toward admin roles. She fought for a combat position. During Phantom Hawk, she held the southern approach alone for 40 minutes after her fire team was wounded. 67 confirmed kills. She died doing what every Marine hopes to do, protecting her brothers and sisters." Sarah let that sink in. Santos could have been pushed into a support role. We would have lost one of our best warriors because of assumptions about what women could do. Colonel Richards stood up. "Lieutenant Colonel, what exactly are you recommending?" "I'm not here to recommend, Colonel. I'm here to observe and report. But what I'm observing is a systemic failure to utilize all available talent. This base has approximately 3,000 Marines. 540 are female. How many are in combat leadership positions?" Richards looked uncomfortable. "I'd have to check the exact numbers." 12, Captain Torres said quietly. 12 female Marines in combat leadership positions out of 540. Sarah nodded. "Thank you, Captain. That's 2%. Meanwhile, what percentage of our enemies do you think are willing to use female fighters?" "ISIS used women as suicide bombers," a major in the back said. "The Taliban has female intelligence operatives." "Exactly," Sarah said. "Our enemies don't limit themselves based on gender. They use every available resource. We handicap ourselves with outdated prejudices." Major Brennan stood up suddenly. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." "Granted. You're a legitimate war hero. No one here disputes that, but you're an exception. Most women can't do what you did. It's not sexism, it's biology." Sarah studied him for a moment. "Major, how much do you weigh?" 210 pounds, ma'am." "I weigh 140. During Phantom Hawk, I carried Sergeant Chen, who weighed 190 pounds, over 200 yards of rough terrain. Not because I'm exceptional, but because I trained for it. Because when someone's life depends on you, you find strength you didn't know you had." She moved closer to Brennan. "But let's test your theory, Major. You believe women can't meet the same standards as men in combat situations." "I believe most can't, ma'am." "Then you won't mind a demonstration. Captain Torres, would you join me?" Torres stood immediately. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah addressed the room. "We're going to the combat fitness course. Anyone who wants to see what female Marines are capable of, follow me. Major Brennan, I especially hope you'll come." The entire room stood. Word was already spreading through the building, and by the time they reached the outdoor combat fitness course, a crowd of over 100 Marines had gathered. Sarah addressed them all. "Marines, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell. Some of you may have heard of me as Phantom Hawk. Today, we're going to settle a debate about capability versus gender. Captain Torres and Major Brennan will run the combat fitness course. Full gear, standard timing." Brennan looked surprised. "Ma'am, I didn't agree to." "Are you refusing, Major?" Sarah asked calmly. His jaw tightened. "No, ma'am." Both officers went to gear up. The crowd grew larger. Someone had set up a digital timer. Within 10 minutes, both Torres and Brennan were in full combat gear, 60 pounds of equipment including weapon, ammunition, and pack. "Standard course," Sarah announced. 800-meter run, ammunition can lifts, maneuver under fire drill, ammunition can carry, grenade throw, and 3-mile run. Minimum passing time is 3 minutes 45 seconds for the maneuver drill, 33 minutes for the entire course. She looked at both officers. This isn't about humiliation or proving superiority. It's about demonstrating that standards are standards regardless of gender. Begin. The timer started. Brennan took an early lead in the run, his longer stride eating up ground. But Torres stayed close, her form efficient and controlled. The crowd cheered for both, though Sarah noticed more female Marines had gathered and were clearly supporting Torres. At the ammunition can lifts, Brennan's strength advantage showed. He completed his repetitions faster, but Torres didn't fall far behind, her technique perfect, wasting no energy. The maneuver under fire drill was where things shifted. This required crawling, sprinting, carrying a simulated casualty, and throwing a grenade. Torres' smaller size became an advantage in the crawling portion. Her agility allowed her to navigate obstacles faster. When it came to the casualty carry, a 180-pound dummy, both struggled. Brennan used brute strength, Torres used leverage and technique. She actually completed that portion 2 seconds faster. The crowd was going wild. Even some of the male Marines who'd been skeptical were cheering for Torres. The final 3-mile run was brutal after the previous events. Both officers were exhausted, their uniforms soaked with sweat. Brennan maintained his pace through sheer determination. Torres matched him step for step. They crossed the finish line within seconds of each other. Brennan at 31:42, Torres at 31:58, both well under the standard. As they caught their breath, Sarah addressed the crowd. "Both Marines met the standard, both are combat capable. The 6-second difference? Meaningless in actual combat. What matters is that both could complete the mission." She helped Torres to her feet, then did the same for Brennan. "Major, Captain Torres just proved she can meet every physical standard required. Do you still maintain women can't handle combat roles?" Brennan, still breathing hard, looked at Torres with something approaching respect. "She met the standard," he admitted. "She exceeded it," Sarah corrected. "And she's not unique. There are dozens of female Marines on this base who could do the same if given the chance." An older gunnery sergeant in the crowd called out, "Ma'am, I served in Iraq in 2003. Had a female corporal in my squad, best shot in the unit. Saved my life twice. Anyone who says women can't fight hasn't seen them in action." This opened a floodgate. Other Marines began sharing stories of female warriors they'd served with. The atmosphere shifted from skepticism to recognition. But then a young private called out, "What about unit cohesion, ma'am? What about the problems with mixing genders in combat units?" Sarah turned to address him. "What's your name, Private?" "Wilson, ma'am." "Tell me, Wilson, have you ever served in a mixed-gender combat unit?" "No, ma'am." "Then you're speaking from assumption, not experience. I've commanded mixed units for 6 years. Unit cohesion isn't about gender, it's about leadership, training, and mutual respect. Problems arise when leaders tolerate discrimination or inappropriate behavior." She addressed the entire crowd. The same arguments were made against racial integration. It would destroy unit cohesion, they said. Black and white soldiers couldn't fight together effectively, they said. They were wrong then, and those making similar arguments about gender are wrong now. Colonel Richards stepped forward. "Lieutenant Colonel, this has been educational, but we have practical concerns. Facilities, regulations, training modifications." "All solvable problems," Sarah interrupted. Other militaries have integrated successfully. Israel, Canada, Norway, they've proven it can be done. We're not blazing a new trail, we're catching up. She looked around at the assembled Marines. Every one of you will face combat differently. Some will rely on strength, others on speed, others on intelligence. Our diversity is our strength. When we limit ourselves based on prejudice, we weaken our force. The crowd around the combat fitness course began to disperse, but the energy remained electric. Sarah noticed small groups of Marines engaged in animated discussions, exactly what she'd hoped to see. Change didn't come from orders alone, it came from conversations between warriors. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, Colonel Richards approached with General Thompson beside him. Sarah snapped to attention, surprised to see the general. "At ease, Mitchell," Thompson said, his weathered face showing a slight smile. "I've been watching from my office. Interesting approach to assessment." "Sir, I didn't expect." "I know you didn't. That's why I didn't announce my presence." Thompson looked at the dispersing crowd. 20 years ago, I would have been leading Brennan's arguments. 10 years ago, I started questioning them. Today, watching this, I know we've been fools." Richards looked uncomfortable. "General, surely you're not suggesting we overturn decades of tradition based on one demonstration." "I'm suggesting we stop wasting talent," Thompson said sharply. "Mitchell, walk with me." The three officers walked toward the command building. Sarah noticed Major Brennan helping Captain Torres carry the gear back to storage, a small but significant gesture. "Tell me about Syria," Thompson said quietly. Sarah's expression tightened. Syria wasn't in her official record. It had been a classified operation. "That's need to know, General," she said carefully. Thompson smiled. "I have need. I know you led Operation Desert Ghost. I know it's the reason you're really here." Sarah stopped walking. "Sir." "Did you think this was just about assessing base culture?" Thompson asked. "Mitchell, we have a situation, one that requires your particular expertise." They entered a secure conference room. Thompson activated the electronic countermeasures and sealed the door. 3 days ago, a Marine Force recon unit went missing in eastern Syria, Thompson began. 8 Marines, including 2 female operators. They were tracking an ISIS cell when communications went dark. He pulled up a map on the screen. Last known position was here near the Iraqi border, hostile territory. Local forces are searching, but they're limited. "You want me to lead the rescue?" Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "I want you to do what you do best, bring our people home. But there's a complication." Thompson pulled up personnel files. "The unit commander is First Lieutenant Rebecca Chen." Sarah's breath caught. Chen as in Sergeant Chen's daughter, the marksman from Phantom Hawk. She joined the Marines to honor her father's memory. Specifically requested force recon, specifically requested combat roles. One of our best young officers. Sarah stared at the photo. Rebecca Chen looked remarkably like her father, the same intense eyes, the same determined set to her jaw. "She doesn't know about my connection to her father," Sarah said. "No, her mother never told her who led the operation, just that her father died a hero." Thompson paused. "Sarah, I need someone who understands what it's like to be trapped behind enemy lines, someone who won't give up. But I also need someone who can handle the emotional weight of this." "When do I leave?" Sarah asked. "Tonight, but there's more." Thompson pulled up another file. "The ISIS cell they were tracking is led by Abu Khalil. He was in the Korangal Valley in 2010. Sarah's blood went cold. "He was part of the force that ambushed us. Intelligence suggests he remembers Phantom Hawk. He's been spreading propaganda about having captured American Marines, specifically mentioning female warriors as proof of American weakness." Richards spoke for the first time since entering the room. "This is a trap. He's baiting us." "Maybe," Thompson agreed. "But we don't leave Marines behind. Mitchell, I'm giving you operational command. Pick your team, whatever resources you need." Sarah studied the map. "I'll need Major Brennan." Both men looked surprised. "Brennan," Richards asked, "after today?" "He's a good Marine with combat experience. He just needed his perspective adjusted. Besides, this mission will require strength and endurance. He has both." She paused. "I'll also need Captain Torres. She speaks Arabic and Pashto." "Done," Thompson said. "Who else?" "Give me the files on all special operations qualified Marines on base. I need 12 more, mix of skills." Sarah was already planning. "And I need someone who knows the area. Any Marines who have operated in that sector recently? Thompson pulled up more files. Staff Sergeant Williams just returned from a rotation there. Sarah smiled slightly. Williams is a common name, first name. David Williams, former radio operator, multiple commendations. Thompson stopped. Wait, is this? Lance Corporal Williams from Phantom Hawk. He stayed in touch. I wrote his recommendation for officer candidate school. Sarah nodded. He's perfect. He knows how I think. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah assembled her team. 8 men, 6 women, each chosen for specific skills. Brennan had initially protested the inclusion of so many female operators, but Sarah shut him down quickly. Major 3 of these women are Navy SEAL qualified. 2 are Marine Raiders. 1 is a combat medic with 4 bronze stars. Would you like to tell them they're not qualified? Brennan wisely stayed quiet. As the team gathered for briefing that evening, Sarah noticed the dynamic. Some of the male Marines seemed uncertain about the female-heavy composition. The women were watching her closely, understanding the weight of this moment. Marines, Sarah began, you've been selected for a classified rescue operation. 8 of our own are missing in hostile territory. We're going to bring them home. She activated the screen showing the missing Marines. 2 of them are women. The enemy is using this for propaganda, claiming female Marines are weak, that America is weak for allowing women in combat. Staff Sergeant Williams stood up. Ma'am, I know that area. It's Taliban and ISIS contested territory. Tribal loyalties shift daily. This is going to be complicated. It gets more complicated, Sarah said. The enemy commander is Abu Khalil. He has a personal stake in this. He was at Korangal Valley in 2010. He survived Phantom Hawk. Several Marines looked at her with new understanding. This is personal for him, she continued. He wants to prove that American female warriors are inferior. He's wrong. We're going to show him how wrong. Captain Torres raised her hand. Ma'am, what are the rules of engagement? Weapons free once we locate our people. Anyone between us and our Marines is a hostile. Sarah's voice was cold. But remember, we're not there for revenge. We're there for rescue. Get our people and get out. She looked at each team member. Some of you have doubts about serving under a female commander. Some of you have doubts about your female teammates. Leave those doubts here. In the field, we're not men or women. We're Marines. Act like it. The briefing continued for another hour. Insertion plans, extraction routes, contingencies. Sarah noticed Brennan asking intelligent questions, his earlier prejudices seemingly forgotten in the face of mission planning. As they prepared to load the aircraft that night, Sarah found herself standing next to the photo of Lieutenant Rebecca Chen. The young woman's file was impressive. Top of her class at the academy, expert marksman like her father, natural leader. I'm coming for you, Sarah whispered to the photo. Your father saved my life. I won't let you down. Williams appeared beside her. Ma'am, the team's loaded. We're ready. Sarah looked at her old friend. He'd aged well, carried himself with the confidence of experience. David, this one's different, she said quietly. They're all different, ma'am, but the mission's the same. Leave no one behind. As they walked to the aircraft, Sarah saw her reflection in the window. 20 years of service showed in the lines on her face, the slight favor of her left shoulder, the gray threading through her hair. But her eyes remained sharp, determined. Major Brennan met her at the ramp. Colonel, I owe you an apology. Save it for after the mission, Major. No, ma'am, I need to say this. I was wrong. About female Marines, about you. My prejudice could have cost lives. Sarah studied him. What changed your mind? Watching tours match me on the course, hearing your story, but mostly reading the files of the women on this team. They've done things I couldn't do. I was a fool. You were ignorant, Sarah corrected. Foolishness is refusing to learn. You learned, that's all I ask. As the aircraft lifted off, Sarah gathered her team one more time. In 12 hours, we'll be in hostile territory. The enemy expects us to fail. They think American diversity is weakness. They're about to learn it's our greatest strength. She looked at each face, male and female, different races, different backgrounds, but all Marines. Phantom Hawk was about survival, she said. This mission is about statement. We're going to show the world what American Marines can do, all of us. The C-130 flew through darkness toward Syrian airspace. Sarah's team sat in 2 rows, faces illuminated by the red tactical lights. They'd switched to mission protocols, no names, only call signs. Sarah was Hawk 1, Brennan was Hammer, Tors was Whisper. 6 hours into the flight, they received updated intelligence. Staff Sergeant Williams, monitoring communications, looked up sharply. Hawk 1, we have a problem. Satellite imagery shows movement at the target location. Looks like they're preparing to move the prisoners. Sarah moved to look at his screen. The thermal images showed approximately 40 hostiles and 2 vehicles. They know we're coming, Brennan said. Or they're just being cautious, Tors suggested. Abu Khalil survived this long by not staying in one place. Sarah studied the images. Something felt wrong. The formation, the positioning, it was too obvious. It's bait, she said suddenly. Look at the vehicle placement. They want us to see this. The real location is somewhere else. Williams pulled up a wider area scan. Ma'am, there's an old compound 3 kilometers north. Thermal shows minimal activity, maybe 6 guards. That's where they are, Sarah said. The convoy is a decoy. They want us to hit the wrong target, alert every hostile in the region. She turned to her team. We're adjusting the plan. Hammer, take Alpha team to observe the convoy. Don't engage unless necessary. Whisper, you're with me, and Bravo team. We hit the compound. The drop zone approached. They would halo jump from 25,000 feet, landing 2 kilometers from the targets under cover of darkness. Remember, Sarah said as they prepared to jump, Lieutenant Chen and her team have been captive for 4 days. They might be injured, might be drugged. Medic, be ready. Sergeant Maria Cruz, the combat medic, nodded. Already prepped for trauma treatment, ma'am. They jumped into the Syrian night. The free fall was silent except for the wind rushing past. Sarah had done dozens of combat jumps, but each one still sent adrenaline surging through her system. They landed in a dried riverbed. No enemy contact. Sarah's team moved north toward the compound while Brennan's team headed to the convoy location. Through her night vision, Sarah could see the compound, a collection of mud brick buildings surrounded by a low wall. 6 guards, as Williams had predicted. But something else, a 7th heat signature underground. Basement or tunnel, Williams whispered. Sarah hand-signaled her team into position. 4 Marines would take the external guards simultaneously. The rest would breach the main building. On my mark, Sarah whispered into her comm. 3, 2, 1, mark. The guards dropped silently. Sarah's team moved through the compound like ghosts. They found the entrance to the underground holding area, a wooden door reinforced with metal. Breaching charges were set. Sarah stacked up with her team. The explosion shattered the night's quiet. They flowed down the stairs into a narrow tunnel. 2 guards at the bottom raised their weapons but were dropped before they could fire. At the end of the tunnel was a metal door. Sarah could hear voices inside, American voices. United States Marines, Sarah called out, we're coming in. They breached the door. Inside, 8 Marines sat against the walls, hands zip-tied. Lieutenant Rebecca Chen was in the corner, her face bruised but eyes alert. About time, Chen said with a weak smile. We were starting to think you'd forgotten about us. As Cruz and another medic began checking the prisoners, Sarah found herself looking at Chen. The resemblance to her father was even stronger in person. Can you walk, Lieutenant? Sarah asked. We all can, ma'am. They wanted us relatively healthy for propaganda videos. Chen's expression darkened. They kept talking about some operation called Phantom Hawk, said they were going to prove female Marines were weak. Gunfire erupted outside. Brennan's voice came through the comm. Hawk 1, convoy was a trap. They're converging on your position. Estimate 40+ hostiles inbound.